Okay, let's have a conversation about Render Wranglers. If you have a moment, don't forget to subscribe, and if you like this video or some other video, share it on social media and click like. Thanks. In the last 25 years, I've spent 12 of those years managing render farms and hiring render teams and IO teams. So I've probably interviewed close to maybe 500 people, and I've definitely hired nearly 100 people into these roles. So I have a really good idea on what it takes to be a render wrangler and why you want to be a render wrangler. In a moment, I'm going to actually play for you some testimonials for some of my former render wranglers who've gone on to be various senior roles within the visual effects, animation, and software industries, and have them tell you why they think it's a good idea to become a render wrangler and what value they got out of it. So stay tuned to the end to hear what they have to say. So render wranglers are the unsung heroes of VFX and animation. Now, if you're not sure what a render farm is, stop here and click on this link and go watch my very short video on what is a render farm, and then come back here. Now, a render wrangler manages the render farm, obviously. Now, this can be a mix of skills it takes to be a render wrangler, and it can be a mix of pipeline skills and knowledge, artist knowledge, visual effects artist knowledge. If you're an IT person, if you want to go into production, if you have some background in customer relations, this can all lead you down the path of being a render wrangler. Now, the job is tough. I can't emphasize that enough. It rolls downhill, and who's at the bottom of the hill is often the render wrangler. They are the first person to get blamed for a problem on the farm, and it's really up to that render wrangler to point out just by evidence what went wrong, and then the blame just evaporates and the artist goes, oh, okay, now I understand, thanks. But you have to deal with that a lot. You have to deal with a lot of angst. A render farm is a very crowded resource with millions of frames running through larger render farms every day. There are 400 artists sometimes using that farm. They're submitting dozens of jobs with hundreds of frames each. The competition is crazy. The pressure on these artists to get their jobs done means that when their job isn't happening right, when it's failing on the farm, when it's not picking up enough farm to get done in time, they are freaking out by the time they get to the render wrangler. So the render wrangler often has to deal with people at a high state of angst, much like a complaint department or sometimes what police officers even have to deal with. It's very intense, and it can really take a toll on a team if they're not thick-skinned and well prepared to defend the operations. Now, this job gives you exposure to the whole pipeline beyond what most studio artists understand. And what I mean by that is because you're a render wrangler, you see the entire pipeline from stuff coming in from the client to stuff going back to the client and all the steps in between. As a result, when render wranglers are promoted into their roles, they often get a fairly lofty position as a lead, or at least considered a very senior person very quickly, because they already know the whole pipeline. And as they hire in talented people from the outside, you as an intrinsic internal knowledge person become an asset that the studio really treasures. Render wranglers tend to make very, very good artists and pipeline folks and production folks because they know the whole pipeline. Now, you're going to see a lot of different titles out there when you're looking for a render wrangler job. Now, these titles might be a PST, which is a production services technician, a digital production administrator. You might see technical resource administrator, render technical assistant, a resource administrator, technical assistant just by itself. Maybe it's called a data IO or a data in and out position. With all these different titles, there's one commonality amongst all of them, and that is your role is to be a whatever it takes sort of fix-it person to help that show along. And you start very junior, and you end up leaving very, very strong and toned, like a Marine leaving boot camp. Now, when it comes to what do these roles do specifically, let's roll through some of the tasks that you often see. Every job will have some portion of these, but no job will do all of these. So, we have managing the render farm, and this is usually based on the level of automation. So if it's a very automated farm and well engineered, then you're doing a lot of meta management. You're managing the farm as an entity and not looking at individual jobs so much, except when there are priorities or exceptions or some sort of aberrant behavior, some sort of degraded farm performance. You're often sort of tweaking the edges while the farm runs in a very automated sense. You might work with production management to set render priorities. Sometimes that's done manually through phone calls. Sometimes that's done through a system that's set up like a web page or a tool where production can enter in their priorities. Queuing, requeuing, pausing, and unpausing jobs. Well, every Render Wrangler does this throughout the day. They're either doing it incessantly to fix a problem, or as just part of their day, they're finding frames that need to be requeued because a machine is locked up. And this is just part of the general tending of the farm. It only takes one frame to not run, often to make an artist not able to use their job the next morning. So every frame counts. Sometimes they'll have them QC or troubleshoot renders. This can be a very time-consuming process, but the studios that have the resources or the people, it's a great way to have an early eye on the product before it ever gets to the dailies room or to the screening room. They'll work with shows on pipeline setups and more administrative tasks. Sometimes the pipeline folks for shows need some help with going through lots of configs and updating it with the most recent information. So these folks will be brought into that. And this is, again, a great way to learn about coding and how pipelines work. And implementing show standards, configs, directory creation. A lot of times studios don't allow anyone to create directories, or they have to create a very specific structure. This team will often be tasked with setting that up, and a lot of the troubleshooting will relate to that as they look at renders that aren't working. Now, on that data side, you've got to manage all that client ingestion to the studio pipeline. You're going to deal with files coming in on portable hard drives, transfers data going in and out in a very logged and secure fashion because there's a lot of concern over data security. You're going to be moving files within the studio to and from different offices that you might have, or to and from the cloud and to backup. You're going to be doing cleanup, deletion, and archiving of files. This is sort of a tedious but very important part of a studio's life cycle, that somebody's out there making sure that all the files that need to go away or perhaps archived before they're deleted. The team will take care of that. They'll be doing lots and lots of tapes. If it's a tape-based infrastructure, often the Render Wranglers or Data I/O folks are dealing with what we call tape shucking. And that's when you're opening lots of different tape cartridges and putting in tapes into these massive machines with hundreds of tapes to do all of the backup and archiving. You'd be surprised how much tape is still really common amongst the studios. Helping out with backup, disaster, and recovery related to those tape drives. Sometimes we need to bring files back, and so these folks will often be the ones putting the tapes into the tape drive, finding the files, and getting them back onto the file system for the show. They'll be sometimes checking in and checking out equipment. I've done that at a few studios. Sometimes there'll be photography equipment or some other type of equipment, and this team is just well-versed to sort of babysit that equipment and checking in and out. And there'll be random tasks. Really, because this crew is so versatile and sometimes large, it's often there 24 hours a day, which we'll talk about in a moment. They're often tasked with duties that might relate to things that need to happen overnight or things that need to be shipped off or clicked on throughout the night. So IT production will sometimes task these folks with additional nighttime tasks. So what kind of knowledge do you need to have to become a Render Wrangler? Well, to do proper troubleshooting, you sort of need to have a mix of knowledge that comes from pipeline, some artist knowledge, maybe some IT knowledge, and production knowledge. No one has all that knowledge. If they had all the knowledge, they'd probably move on to the next role and wouldn't be a Render Wrangler. But you need to have some subset of these following skills. On the pipeline knowledge side, it really helps to have any coding ability. If you can do some Linux shell scripts, or if you've written any batch scripts with Windows, this really helps a lot in the pipeline area. On IT, the question is, have you ever banged on machines? Are you comfortable building your own machine, writing shells and bat scripts again? Maybe have you worked in a help desk or done desktop support, worked on network or have network knowledge like on the TCP/IP stack? So artist knowledge. Maybe you went to school and you've built up a knowledge base of VFX and animation production through education and self-education. And then you might have production skills. And really what production skills often comes down to is soft skills. This is about being diligent and having good scheduling methodologies and being able to inventory shots and assets and keep good track and be very detail oriented. Managing emails and customer service. A production person has to be a people person. They have to manage people at the lowest level. They're dealing with personalities, and again, in this tense and high intensity environment. So it's important that you have these customer service skills. I found that when it came to customer service, I loved it if someone worked at a complaint desk, or if somebody was a McDonald's manager, or if somebody worked at a customer service role. Well, then they've dealt with the irate customer, and it really helps if you can come into this job knowing how to deal with irate customers. Now let's talk about the night shift. A render wrangling team is often a 24-hour team, and in many studios, that means that there's a night shift. The night shift can be really, really hard on people. In a lot of studios, they'll start the new people in the night shift. So that means after just a few weeks of training, you're now on the night shift. So as much as you wanted to get into this new studio, you now don't see anyone in the studio except maybe one coworker or two in your role that you see in the early morning and the evening when you come and go. This can be a really tough role because you're sitting alone or with one other junior person. The whole studio is riding on you every night, making sure that that farm needs to run the way everyone intends it to. And in the morning, you leave and everyone comes back in. And if there's anything wrong, everyone is screaming about why the night people didn't do their job. And unfortunately, those night people are already asleep. So by the time the manager or the team wants to find out what happened overnight, they have to wait until the next night to find out the answer. This can create a lot of contention and a lot of tension for the night crew. The other thing is there can be rotations. Sometimes studios will rotate people around shifts. So you can imagine you've been on the morning shift for 6 or 8 weeks, then you're finally on the day shift for another 6 or 8 weeks, then maybe you go on the swing shift for 6 or 8 weeks, and then after you've put in all that time and you've been there for many, many months, then you have to go on to the night shift. And that can be really hard on you. It can be really hard on your circadian rhythm. It can be hard on your family or your relationships. And then I've seen the folks who tried to spend those 8 weeks on the night shift just living a normal life, trying to hang out with their family and friends during the day and on the weekends and pretending they're not really on a night shift. Those folks burn out really fast and usually regret that. So the night shift can be really, really hard, and you have to make sure that you have the constitution to be able to handle a night shift. I've seen folks get pretty weird on the night shift. So like I said, I've supervised a lot of render wranglers over the years, and so I've asked a few to come to this video and explain to you all why they think it's a good idea to be a render wrangler, what value they got out of a render wrangler, and what advice they may have for you if you want to become a render wrangler. So let's give them a listen.
Hi, my name is James. I'm a senior staff technical artist. So what's the advantage of starting at a studio as a render wrangler? I think I've benefited in quite a few ways in my career. Working as a render wrangler, you have to talk with different people from different departments, and so you get to learn about different personality types. And I do think it's a great way to get your foot in the door to film, particularly if you don't have any experience in film. Render wrangling definitely helped me get my foot in the door. So I'm eternally thankful for Joe for hiring me and for having that experience as a render wrangler, because I've used different things I've learned from that experience, and I keep on applying them to other places.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexa. I currently work as a product specialist in media collaboration. I think that a render wrangler position and the data wrangler position is very underrated because, like when you come in, it's a foot in the door. It's something that will get you at the company where you are going to be the bookends of the production, where you come in and you start a production, you end a production, everything goes through you. You're talking to a whole bunch of producers, you're talking to supervisors, you're exposed to so many different artists. So in terms of that, it is a very easy way to network. And it's a very easy way to see what kind of skills you need to build in order to move to wherever you want to go, whether you want to go into production, you want to go into engineering, you want to go into IT, because you're going to know the entire pipe. You're going to know everything that goes through beginning to the end. And in terms of that, I think that's super valuable.
My name is Darren, and I am a character effects technical director. For me, I didn't go to art school, and so I didn't really know much about how things worked at all, like departments and all sorts of things. So it was kind of a crash course into what is visual effects and how things worked. That was kind of the biggest benefit for me because I came from a regular software engineering position. It also allowed me to learn what the different roles were, and that's probably why I started as a render wrangler.
I'm Craig, and I'm a lighting TD. I would say the introduction of Linux, and then just getting a sense of what happens in a VFX studio for people who don't work in it. When it comes to perspective, this job offers the biggest possible perspective because you're dealing with so many departments. Whereas when you're working with production services or technical assistant or whatever those different job roles are called, you end up talking to production and various departments, and you get to speak to people, which is another important aspect, which skill that you learn while you're working the job.
So one of the things that I learned as a render wrangler, which sounds stupid, but it really applies to everywhere, is that having a strong farm can really empower a studio far beyond like individual artists. And what I mean by that is just being able to have multiple machines doing the work that a single artist would be doing can greatly speed up your pipeline. I've shifted over to games and I'm still applying the same concepts where automated a small farm service to render out those cinematics each night so that we could kind of like glance through them, and again using a visual tool like Shotgun to go through and look at those videos from a high level, seeing like if anything changed, like did all of the nighttime levels get darker all of a sudden? Let's compare to last week. You got to have, you got to keep track of where your pipeline is at and where your content is at. And by running regular renders, those definitely help out to keep track of things over time. So even in games, we're doing the same thing where we run out different services on machines, running a distributed compiling, that's huge for us, and we've done a couple of different techniques of using that, but it's essentially another type of farm that we're using here in games, and we're using it for effect simulation type stuff when we have machines available.
For me, getting into a render wrangling role was a very conscious decision because I was switching from more of an artistic role and I didn't really have a computer science background. I didn't have a technical background. So I needed to build some of these skills. So this is where it comes in terms of where I was like, I need to build a different network. I need to be able to build some skills that are going to be technical, that are going to get me to where I need to go. And I need to know what that roadmap actually looks like. So in terms of like, how do I get from having no skills basically to being a really good engineer? And I think that has been super helpful. And I have personally chosen Joe at that point because I knew that he was an excellent mentor and he would be able to help me guide through that journey.
I think for me, it was as much about who I got to work with. When I was in that position, you get to meet a lot of people from a lot of different places. And it really gives you the opportunity to kind of show those people what you can do. If you can take initiative to make things better and easier, people notice, and that kind of helps you move around.
Well, the render farm is the bigger one, right? Because if anyone wants to get into rendering, they have to at some point be involved with what's going on in the farm. You can render something locally and it works fancy and nice and everything. But rendering on a render farm, and depending on what they're using, whether you're using servers where it sometimes renders are behind a cache, or if they're using the cloud, all those things are various aspects that don't get considered when you're rendering something locally. And when you're rendering on a farm, you got to play nice with the other jobs running simultaneously. So your appreciation for optimization and resource usage is a lot better, I would imagine, versus if you just jumped into the role directly.
I would say for those of you who are looking to get into an artist role, I would say it's very hard to jump from a render wrangler into an artist role unless you have formal schooling in that area, like as if you went to art school or something like that. Or if you have like a really strong portfolio. but it's not really an easy jump to go from render wrangler into an artist. However, if you're trying to get into a technical role, like being a TD or being just a general programmer for VFX, I would say this is an excellent way to get your foot in the door. And, the things that I learned here, I have been building blocks for the rest of my career.
For render wrangling, I would say go into it. Seriously, like it's so difficult to get a position straight out of school when you're getting into the industry because it's all about who you know. And in terms of that, like not a lot of jobs post, junior artist or junior engineer position. So you kind of have to get in the door first before you can move around inside of there. It's also an excellent opportunity to go into a bigger studio because they will typically have bigger render wrangling departments and they will have kind of higher expectations, and they're the ones who will typically hire senior artists instead of junior artists, but they are the ones who will promote from the render wranglers into the artist roles because you already know the pipeline, you already know the tools, so it's a very natural progression for you to get into what they're already doing. The only time that I wouldn't recommend being a render wrangler is that if you don't have a plan in place. So if you get into there and you think, I'm just do render wrangling and see what happens, you have to start building a network. You have to start talking to people. You have to understand where you want to go. There's nothing wrong with being a render wrangler in itself. It's an excellent career. You can move into management. You can know a lot about the render farms, which is very, very useful. And, studios will pay a lot of money for people who are really good at managing render farms. But if you want to be an artist, if you want to be an engineer, if you want to be in production, you have to have that plan in place and you have to start talking to the people who will help you get there.
I think you should probably, if you know you want to get into something different, no one ever wants to be a render wrangler forever. I would say go for those positions that you want to be in first. And if you're having trouble with getting into those, then getting into the render wrangler position is a good place. I know a lot of people who started off wanting to be artists or whatever, and then once they started doing render wrangling, they got put into positions where they could see other types of jobs. And so a lot of people ended up, I wanted to be an artist, but now I want to be a technical director instead. So I think that is kind of a plus. And I think it depends on what you want to do. I think if you wanted to be on the technical side of things, it's a more natural path than an artist. Not that you can't go the artist route from the render wrangler. It just seems less common. And I think that might just be because people's interests change once they get there, not that they couldn't make that move themselves.
As a breakthrough or a foot in the door kind of job, it's a good thing to do. If you don't have anything else to do, why not get into something that is within the industry because of perspective? I mean, like I said, there's nothing that will give you free perspective better than this kind of a job, So you get into it. I would recommend not staying in the department if somebody's focused on doing something else. I think a couple of years is the most somebody wants to spend in this kind of department. And if they don't see growth, then they need to consider something else.
I want to thank James, Alexa, Darren, Craig for making that video for me. And I just want to give my own advice here at the end on what I think you need to do if you want to become a render wrangler, and a few tips that will help you get the job. First, learn Python, at least just a little. There's a lot of tutorials online, and if you can at least get a handful of chapters in and explain in your interview how you've maybe made a tip calculator with Python or done some simple task, it will let the team know that you're at least ready to start looking at existing Python scripts, which is often what wranglers do. They're not writing them in the beginning, they're just looking at them and maybe changing one word in them. So just let them know that you know a little Python. Same thing with Linux. Learn a little Linux. It's very easy to install a virtual machine of Linux on your computer, and then you can learn how to move files around with the command line. Do not use the mouse. It doesn't count if you just use the Windows clicky version of Linux. You need to open up a shell, and you need to learn how to use the cp command, the make directory command, the ls command, the mvs command. Learn how to use rsync, gzip, how to tar and gzip things. If you can just learn those basic tasks, you will have a leg ahead of a lot of your folks that are interviewing alongside of you. If you do find yourself getting an interview, don't worry if you don't know everything. Like I said, they're going to ask you a lot of questions of what do you know, and you're not going to know everything. If you knew everything, you wouldn't get this job. You would get some senior job above this level. So in the end, you're going to answer no to some of those questions when they ask you if you know something. Just be humble, be accepting. And one thing I might suggest to everyone is don't answer with, I don't know that, but I'm willing to learn, at least more than once. It starts to get old when you give that answer 3 or 4 times in an interview. Now, if you do have an interview, find something that you didn't know how to do that's in the job description and start learning about it. So you can highlight that you started learning about it in the interview. So if they said that you're going to need to use Tractor as the render manager and you've never seen Tractor, well, read the first few chapters of the owner's manual. It's not that hard to just read the chapters, and then you can go in and you can drop a few words and say that you saw that and that you started studying it. Again, this shows initiative. Studios and hiring teams want to see that you show initiative and willing to learn. It's such a big part of this role that it's one of the biggest skills you need to demonstrate in that interview is how you are willing to learn. So finding something you didn't know and then showing how you've taken time in those intervening weeks to learn it will go a long way with a team. So I wish you the best of luck as you go out to being Render Wranglers. I can't endorse it enough. It is the hardest job in the industry, I think, sometimes. So think about a render wrangling career. The key to success is really making all the people you're working with really happy with what you do. And there's no more potential than this role to make entire crews and whole shows happy with you individually. And if they're happy with you, they're going to hire you onto their crew. They're going to want to work with you in the future. So this job has more potential to expose your skills to an entire studio more than most jobs in a studio. So I strongly endorse this. If you have any questions about being a render wrangler, please comment below. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And I even do mock interviews for some of my friends. So if you're confused what to do out there, let me know, and I'll try to help you along. Good luck.